oh, hang on a minute. If the calls are so cheap, what if I did 5 calls? I have to be careful. So I'm one of the testers for Gemini. I'm very reluctant to criticize them just because, like, I've hung out with Lance, I've hung out with Harrison, stuff like that. I know how much effort they put into this. And I kind of feel like they are thinking these things through. And this is one of the reasons why I think people should learn LangChain, right? Is that if you're going to do agents or something, go and learn that stuff so that you then can understand, like, okay, what's actually going on. And then often you'll realize, oh, for my project, I don't need all that stuff, right? I only need this bit and this bit and this bit. The frameworks are not as important as the tools, right? The tools are way more important. And when I talk about the tools, what I'm talking about is not just the actual API call or that kind of thing, but how do you structure the data going in and how do you just structure the data coming out, all right? So the language models respond to data in different ways. All right, so if you're going to scrape something or you're going to get some searches or something like that, you want to make sure that you return it in a way that the LLM can make use of that. This is a big thing I believe in.
Sam, welcome to the webinar. So Sam, I'm a huge fan of you. I've been watching your content for at least over a year now. And
awesome, thank you.
Yeah, so I'll let you introduce yourself, but I just want to request, I need you to do like the signature intro that you do on your videos.
What's the signature? Oh, where I go, okay.
Yes.
So okay, that started all because, like, I just kind of believe, like, jumping into it and getting going. So okay, my name's Sam. I originally came from Australia. I haven't lived in Australia for a long time. I've lived around the world in a number of different places, mostly in Asia. I have a background in startups, so I've built 2 B2C startups with more than 1 million users. I've done a number of different things. Like, currently, I have myself and my co-founder, we have a startup called Red Dragon AI that we've been doing since 2017. I specialize in stuff to do with deep learning. So I've worked on deep learning since 2014. And then I sort of got to be a lot more known, I guess, in the last year because of YouTube. So that was total accident. Basically, my background is sort of like, I've been really working on large language models for a while. I've had papers at NRIPS, EMNLP with my co-founder. We've had papers at a bunch of different workshops around the place and stuff. We've worked on large language models since 2018, was our first paper at NRIPS on LLMs. And we've sort of seen everything change. And the YouTube thing came about as an accident, that I had a lot of friends who were in this sort of in the ML space, but didn't really know much about LLMs. And they kept asking me questions. So I thought, I'll just make some videos and put it up and start explaining why this stuff is important. And it became a lot more popular than I thought really quickly. So I've kind of lent into that. So anyway, hopefully that answers some of the questions, or shoot it if I left something out, let me know.
Yeah, I was just waiting for that intro, but thank you so much for doing it. So last time we talked, we were chatting on over email, and you mentioned that you were in Paris, and I know you mentioned before you're based out of Singapore. So do you travel a lot, and like, were you in Paris for like AI Tinkerers? Was that right?
I was in Paris coincidentally at the same time as AI Tinkerers. So I went along. I really wanted to check out Station F, which is like their sort of startup space and stuff like that. And I caught up with the people at Mistral and stuff like that. And then I went to the AI Tinkerers. Awesome event, was really cool. Really interesting group of people. Small group, a small group. But definitely a really interesting group. There were sort of 6 talks. I think a third of the talks were from Hugging Face. So it was kind of like, they're well represented there. That's like their hometown kind of thing. And yeah, no, it was really interesting. I've sort of checked out the AI Tinkerers in the States, in SF. There's one in Singapore, which I haven't been to yet. I've been overseas each time it's been on, kind of thing. But I really like the idea of AI Tinkerers. So I'm one of the co-organizers of Machine Learning Singapore. So we've run that since 2017, early 2017, and that was really focused on, originally it was all about deep, we used to just call it TensorFlow and deep learning, because TensorFlow was like the only sort of framework when we started, and we did a lot of stuff with Google, so we did that. We call it ML, for the past 4 or 5 years, we've called it ML Singapore. We have about 6,000 members for that, and we normally get a couple hundred people for each meetup. So it's really interesting to see in Paris that actually it was smaller, but it definitely had a nice vibe about it. They had a really good attendance and stuff like that. So I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, so I've been to Singapore, I think once in my life when I was like 12 with my parents.
Awesome.
And I remember like my parents were like, "Hey, if you work really hard in school, you can get into NUS." I remember that. And that was like the place. It's like the Harvard of like Asia, basically.
So when we first started the ML meetup back in 2017, there really wasn't an ML scene here. And that's why we were trying to do it, was we were trying to basically get people, especially into deep learning, back then. And definitely, there's a lot of multinational companies here. You also have a lot of the Chinese companies have their offices here. So like ByteDance is sort of headquartered here. Alibaba has, stuff here, like a lot of the big sort of, and a lot of them have like AI labs here as well. So, we've had like interns that are now working for, the Alibaba AI lab, or, as they're doing their PhDs and stuff like that. So the scene here has grown a lot. We've got next week, so I'm not going to be here next week, but next week, OpenAI is doing the Dev Day here. So that's like one of 3 Dev Days in the world. They did one in SF, one in London, and they're doing the one here. And the talk is that they're going to be opening an office here. So Singapore is well situated. It's, commercially, it's got, issues and stuff like that. Like as a startup hub, it's got some things good, some things bad. The bad things being things like that it's just such a small market, right? This is like literally a sort of city state. It's so small that people call it like Monaco of the East kind of thing, because it's literally just one city, and you've got like 5.5 million people here, and that's it. And then you're surrounded by Southeast Asia, which is, you've got 300 million people in Indonesia, 100 million in Philippines, 70, 80 million in Thailand. So you've got big things, but they're all independent places, which makes it really hard to sell to them and stuff like that for startups. So it's got good things, it's got bad things. Definitely, there's a big sort of AI scene now with a lot of, like you mentioned, NUS and some of the other institutions are producing some really good PhDs that are going on to doing stuff. When we first started, we would go to NRIPS or something, and our startup would have more papers in the conference than NUS. Right now, that is not the case now. Right, they're like nowadays the deep learning, things that they're definitely well represented. So it's an interesting place, yeah.
Do you see so you've been in the scene for much longer, and you mentioned you guys were working on LLMs for like since like 2018. So do you have any like word of caution or anything like that for like people who are just getting into it like today?
I think there's advantages and disadvantages. I would say the advantages are that, like, man, it's so easy to learn now, right? There's so many YouTube channels you can watch, so many resources that you can get started and stuff like that. That just wasn't the case before. So I think that's a really good thing. I think that you also want to be careful of like the hype. That nowadays it's funny because like I think of myself as sort of working in deep learning. Although I see more and more like the YouTube channels that do really well, it's all just about APIs, right? Everything's just pinging the API. You don't need to know how the model works. You don't need to know anything like that kind of thing. And I get that. I get that like a lot of people are going to go that kind of route. I do think it's really worth it though for you to understand like how some of these things work. I think going forward, that's going to help. Like we've got, there's we've got a bunch of new things coming out and stuff like that. And I think we're going to see, it's good for people to know those things. So back in 2014, almost no one talked about deep learning, right? It was just such a niche thing. By about 2016, you might see like one post on Medium every week, right? It was like,
2016, right?
Yes, so 2016, that like things had taken off. Around then, I'd met my co-founder. We were both really into deep learning. We were like, okay, this is clearly a thing. It's going to be a big thing, and it's it's just a different world, right? Like I went to NRIPS in back then it was called NIPS in 2017. You could walk up to Ilya and start chatting to Ilya about something. You could walk up to the DeepMind guys, chat to them, stuff like that. And yeah, they were kind of well known in their field, but they certainly weren't like they are now, right? Like now you go to any of these conferences, you're just not going to see them even there, right? So definitely things have changed in that sense. And not all for the good. Like what I mean is like, I kind of feel that if people are starting out now, you don't, the temptation is just to forget all the history and just go for like the latest thing. And you don't sort of see the progression of what worked and what didn't work early on and how they came back to certain things. Like I find that really interesting, like with the whole, with some of the things that OpenAI is working on, some of the things that Google's working on. Really, some of these ideas are not new at all. They're things that people have been, thinking about for a long time. It's just now, you've got the compute, you've got more data, you've got all these sorts of things. That's the kind, that's something that I think is like kind of it is kind of really interesting, but people don't sort of realize that. Like everyone's just conditioned to think that, oh, this is the latest thing, and this is like, the awesome thing that I should be like, oh wow, and then everything's new, right? Like all the YouTube hypers that are out there kind of want to make you think that everything's new, where it's like, not always, right?
Yeah, I remember reading about like the React paper, like that came out like 2018 or something. Like it didn't come out recent, or 2022. I don't know.
It came out, yeah, I think it's like 2022 or early 23, something like that. I did a video of it, and like March last year or something, and that was like again, really cool idea, still being used, and people are just starting to wake up to some of it, now. That a lot of these things like RAG, right? RAG's been around for a few years. And RAG,
what was it called before? Or it's called RAG.
Like there was a paper, RAG by Patrick Lewis and others that, sort of that idea was around, because if you go back to sort of like 2018, okay, give you an example. In 2019, we had a paper in EMNLP called Paraphrasing with Large Language Models, right? And that paper was built on GPT-2. So that's like a 1.5 billion parameter model. And we thought it was huge, right? Like back then, there was like, oh, this is, it was a real pain to try and do any sort of fine tuning of it. It was a real pain to try and do inference with it, all these sorts of things. And don't forget, back then, if you remember, like OpenAI was saying that it was so dangerous that they couldn't release it at the start. And then you had like Richard Socha at Salesforce who released Control, which they made sure was like 1.6 billion, just that little bit bigger, and they just released the weights and stuff like that. But like, those sorts of things, it's a different world, right? That like now, okay, what we thought was really big really wasn't big, and maybe even today, what we think is big is not going to be, big in 2 years' time from now, kind of thing. So I think like, but the fundamentals are still the same, right? Really, the transformer architecture hasn't changed that much at all. As much as people have tried to do some really cool stuff, and there's been some cool stuff, out there to improve it, fundamentally, a lot of the stuff is still the same.
For sure. So going back to present day, Logan Kilpatrick from Google posted this yesterday about
I know
this
Logan, yes.
secret Gemini experimental model that's only available on Google AI Studio. I'm sure you're aware of this. I want to
Yes.
hear your thoughts on this.
Okay, so I have to be careful. So I'm one of the testers for Gemini. And so I've been back in 2017. I was one of the first 10 Google developer experts in the world appointed by Google, and through that and a few other things, I ended up becoming one of the testers for the Gemini models and stuff like that. I haven't had a lot of chance to play with this new model. The direction, the models are getting good. If you know sort of a little bit about how Google works, they tend to basically put something out and then iterate on it. So like people bagged on Gemini when it first came out, but really that was just like a first sort of, iteration. And then we've just seen them do, improve it over time. I can remember back, so supposedly I've been told that I was the first non-Googler to try the million context window. So I got access to that before it came out. And I remember with that, like I was kind of blown away that like, whoa, okay, this is like a game changer. And I think like, and even from then to now, Google's gone just and iterated and got better and better and better. And so I understand that it annoys some people that they release these experimental models. So like the one you're talking about is the 1114 experimental model. You got to understand that it's a good thing for Google to basically put these out and then see where it doesn't work, or to see like if someone comes and says, hey, it's awesome for this and this and this, but suddenly now it's just not working for this kind of thing. So I think people really don't understand how careful you have to be when you're doing the SFTs, when you're doing the RL sort of alignments and stuff of these things, that you can actually mess parts of it up, right? So you want to make sure that, so it's a good thing to basically give it to people to test and then see like, okay, it looks like everything's good. Then it can roll out into a sort of a full production version or something. So yeah, like I've seen that it hit number 1 on the LMSys chatbot arena, right? So, but who knows? Like I'm hearing other things from OpenAI coming soon too. So we will see.
So me personally, I got on the Gemini train recently. I used to
Right?
be, my entire stack was on OpenAI, and then they came out with this OpenAI library compatibility, so you can just have to change like 2 lines of code, and now you're using like Gemini. And then I realized that, wow, like Gemini Flash is really good at OCR. Like it's way cheaper, it's way faster, and it's like it works really well with OCR. So I'm on that now, and I mean can't wait to try this experimental model. As long as they make it not experimental anymore, I'll put that on production.
So the big thing at Google, they realized quite early that okay, that cost, the whole sort of thing. So we've been seeing this sort of pattern over this year, and it's still going on, right? Is that the costs are coming down? There are a number of different
one model.
For which one? The O1 or
the Haiku one?
Oh, the Haiku, yes. Okay, I did a video about that. Yeah, like that's definitely the exception to the rule. The simple fact though is that most of the companies are getting better at doing inference. They're getting better at doing distillation, right? So they're distilling the big models down to smaller models that they can run. I think people don't realize how small some of the previous generation models actually were. Things like ChatGPT was nowhere near what people thought. Like people know that the research version was 1.75 billion parameters. What is 175 billion parameters? Sorry, but the version in production was nowhere near that, right? And this is like a common thing that as everyone's gotten better at distillation, and using things like mixture of experts models and stuff like that, they're able to get inference to be much faster, therefore, and also much cheaper. And I think Gemini has really benefited from that. Google's really sort of played to that. They've spent like a lot of effort on it. You know, the one you asked me sort of like about the YouTube channel. One of the reasons why I ended up doing more of the YouTube channel was because I had friends at DeepMind. I had friends in like some of these things, and I would see that like, you know, people just weren't covering them. They weren't really perhaps showing their models in a good light. Like, you know, and so I kind of felt like, yeah, these people work their ass off at this stuff, right? And honestly, the average person, you know, just opens a thing and types in something. Like we've gotten to a stage now where most people cannot tell what is a good model, right? And even like for a couple of the new models that will come out between now and the next few months, kind of thing. I'm even looking for like, okay, what are the best things that I can test it on? Because all of the models are getting so much better. You know, all of the models just in general are getting much better. And the average person is just typing stuff in that everyone's fine-tuned to do that now. So if you think about it, like where someone, you know, asks, hey, give me ideas for this essay or something like that, that kind of thing. Yeah, okay, back in GPT-3, maybe like not most of the models couldn't do it in the Palm days and stuff like that, because they just didn't have that much fine tuning or instruction fine tuning for that kind of thing, and the alignment stuff. Now everyone is, so most of, you know, probably like 95% of all things that go into a large language model now could be done easily by Flash or even Flash 8B, right? You know, especially
Yeah, I
Flash
love
8B.
Flash 8B.
Yeah, and it's just like, and it's insanely cheap, right? You're talking about like a couple of cents for 1 million tokens or something. It's basically free, right? If you think about it, if you've got anything in production that can make the slightest amount of money, your LLM cost with that kind of model is free. So then that opens up a whole new world of like, and I think this is where we're at this really interesting point now where people are just starting to wake up, you know, because of the agents a lot, but people are starting to wake up and realize, oh, hang on a minute, if the calls are so cheap, what if I did 5 calls, right, for the one thing, right? What if I, like, you know, take this input and then I ask that question in 5 different ways, and I then summarize that back, and I do this, and I do some reflection steps, and I do some other cool stuff. That's the kind of thing that you know, people would then, you know, people are starting to realize this, and this is definitely the direction, you know, that people are going, is that like as you get faster inference and stuff like that, you can see that, okay, suddenly all these things become you know, possible. I think Grok was one of the ones that you know, that sort of opened that up when they just had the much faster llama models. Flash obviously is a key one, and the Flash 8B. It's really interesting because, like, again, I was one of the testers for the Flash 8B before it got released, and one of the conversations around at that time was, would people even use this model, right? Like,
Yeah, I want to ask you, like, what use case excites you the most about that 8B model? Because I'm trying to fit that into my workflow as well.
So, you know, the thing I would say is that back then, my take on it was, okay, if it's cheaper and it's faster, then people will find a use case for it, right? And I kind of feel like that now. So some of the agents that I build for fun, I leave them where they go and troll the internet, you know, overnight or something like that. And they try to make their own RAG data sets and stuff like that. They just sort of go off, scrape sites, ask questions about that, you know, look for information, do searches, that kind of thing. That, you know, both those Flash models, but especially the Flash 8B for that, it's just so cheap, right? Like I can just leave that running for 12 hours and it can do, you know, even a few millions of calls overnight. You know, millions of tokens overnight, and it really doesn't, you know, it's not going to break the bank at all, right? It's like, one of the projects I was working on recently, I was like, one of my team accidentally left something on, right? Accidentally spun up some GPUs and stuff like that and left something on. and it cost, it suddenly the cost spiked and stuff like that. And so I found out about it, and I went in and we worked out the problem, shut it down and stuff like that. The funny thing was, in that project, because I had gone in because something had gone wrong, I was looking at all the costs for that project. And the Gemini cost for that project is like 87 cents. And I just thought, holy shit, like, this is just insane, right? Like, this is chugging away, doing stuff all the time. And for the month, it was like 87 cents on Gemini. And suddenly it made me think, what if we were trying to spend $10 on Gemini for this? Or like, what if we were, what if we were just doing, if we just did 10x the number of calls? And we, asked for maybe consensus or added more reflection steps. It really is not going to change the cost that much, but it could actually then make the whole system sort of work better. And I kind of feel this is the point we are at now, where people are starting to realize that. And I think, like with the Flash models also, like you mentioned, they're so good at OCR. So I just did a video which will come out next week for Llama OCR. And I think like that's kind of cool, the idea behind it and stuff like that. But I've also, done stuff with the Flash model for OCR, right?
I did some comparisons there too. I don't know. You should tell me your results. But what I found was, so I used like the Together AI, like free Llama 11B 3.2 to OCR, and OCR code screens. And I used Gemini Flash 1.5. To do the same. I found Gemini to be much better. I don't know about you. So you tell me your results now.
So I was just playing today with the 90B model, right? And even then, so the 90B model is really weird. Like I don't know if people realize this. Generally, when you add a image encoder to an LLM, right, which is how these people are making these things, the image encoder is small. So if you look at, like, I think it's like Gwen 2 VL or whatever, that's basically a 70B model with the encoder. Maybe it's like, a little bit 72, something like that. Generally, the encoder is around sort of like 1 billion, parameters, not a huge amount of parameters. That 90B has got a 20 billion vision encoder, which to me, either Facebook's hiding stuff in there or Meta's hiding stuff in there, that there's other stuff that it can do, like perhaps voice, or like, I've heard that they're supposedly working on a voice mode, mode for that and stuff like that. So perhaps that's, in their training. But there's something strange about why it's so big. The 90B, it's okay. I would say out of the box, I would probably go for Flash. Yes. That using it. But I get that, like, some people don't want to use it, right? Like some people, it's amazing, like how many people don't trust Google, or they just want to use.
I have one gripe with Google. There's one gripe that I have with Google, because the reason why it took me so long to set one up was because the amount of hoops you had to jump through. And this reminds me of every, enterprise kind of like software too. Like when I was on Azure, it took me like almost like 6 hours or 5 hours to like set everything up properly, have like permission models and stuff like that. And when I went on Vertex AI, I think,
right,
similar. It's like takes longer than it would have taken me to like set up something from like Grok or OpenAI. So it's like, it's not like 3 clicks and then SDK in. It's like permissions, and then it's like going to AWS basically.
Yes. So if you're using AI Studio, it's not like that, right? If you're using AI Studio, it's basically just an API key, and then you're done. And so this is one of the Gemini API team is definitely working on making that AI Studio accessible for exactly this reason. Like the thinking, from the way I understand it, is that yes, you use Vertex if you're going to put something into production with a lot of stuff and other things around it. If you're just going to be trying to like try out prototyping, hacking on Gemini or something like that, use AI Studio. It's just really simple. And the thing with that too now is you can actually do payments on that. and then you're basically unlocking tiers where you've got lots of quota. So the free version, okay, you're going to get limited quota and limited, QPMs or queries per minute kind of thing. But the version where you actually pay, I think it's you prepay something or something like that, then you're going to get that. And there's a lot more models coming. I can say, like you're going to see more models coming to that AI studio thing. And not just LLMs, but like the thinking is that, a lot of the sort of generative AI stuff will sort of come through there. So it just makes it really easy for people to try this stuff out.
For sure. So speaking of, so we get cheap models, potentially make more calls, but I want to know what excites you the most in terms of like inference. So you mentioned Grok. Is there anything else really kind of like piqued your interest?
Obviously the whole test time compute stuff is really interesting, right? So with the O1 models from OpenAI, that some of those ideas have been around for a while, but it's interesting to see like, okay, that they're starting to come to fruition. So I think that's the thing. One of the biggest things we're working on in our startup is the whole concept of reasoning. So like I built a little thing called the poor man's O1, which is.
I would try that. You got 10 minutes.
More because it was like it's a version of a Phi 3.5 model, so it's a very small 3.8 billion parameter model, but again generating these really long chain of thought patterns. And being able to decide what chain of thought patterns it generates and stuff like that at test, at inference time, that definitely seems to help the models. So and we've known for quite a while that everyone's training on chain of thought. So if you go back a year, or let's say you go back 18 months or something like that, and you try out the models from then, you won't see chain of thought patterns just coming out of the model naturally. Right, you'll have to ask for it to think step by step. You'll have to do these kind of things. Nowadays, everyone trains on chain of thought when they're doing their SFTs, when they're doing, instruction tuning, alignment, and stuff like that. So that becomes something that's more clear. Yeah, I think you're going to see things get faster. There's like Google's talked a little bit about the TPU-6s, but I think you might see more stuff around that from Google. I think at the moment one of the biggest challenges a lot of people are having is inference. So for example, at OpenAI, it sounds like they're GPU constrained, right? So the challenge becomes like, how do you allocate your GPUs? How much do you put into inference? How much do you put into training a new model? And I think people totally don't realize that how this stuff has scaled up so much, that one, how expensive that compute is, and also just logistically how hard it is to basically do some of this stuff. To basically put together a cluster of thousands of GPUs. And people are starting to work on, already we've got clusters out there of 10,000 GPUs, or tens of thousands of GPUs. Next year you'll probably see 100,000 GPUs. Someone will build a cluster that size. I think that Meta's probably well on the way to that. Now for training Llama 4, they're going to need to do that. I think XAI is doing that. So in regards to inference, I think there's as consumers, it's awesome. We're getting so much more choice. We're getting so much more out of this. I think sometimes a lot of the consumers are not that patient. Like I laughed recently when Sam Altman tweeted out something about that they just finally delivered the advanced voice mode or something, and people were pissed off and were asking for something else, right? And I can understand that people don't realize just how hard it is to do some of this inference stuff, and how this is big teams of really, really smart people working on getting it so that you can just ping the API and get a voice back, or get, get back like 20,000 tokens or something, right? So that's something that I think people I think far too many people think that it's quite easy when it's not. That's what I would say.
Yeah, all the full stack web dev people should be grateful for this amazing technology that came out.
I can see from both ways, because I can also see that okay, that they don't really care about that. They just want the tokens or something like that. That's fair enough. That's and I think that will come. One of the reasons why Google took a long time to sort of take off in some of these things. I think people do not realize that, okay, ChatGPT was an awesome hit, yes. And it was, it got up to sort of like maybe, millions of people a day, maybe at the peak, sort of 10 million people a day or something like that, and maybe 100 million people a month. Google serves 9 billion calls a day on Google search, right? If they had put out a free service or something like that straight away, it was going to get a lot of people, and because of that meant that they had to scale the models down, right? So they couldn't do inference with their best models, because there's just no way they could do that for 100 million people. So therefore they have to scale the model down so that they could actually serve a model that they could serve at scale. So I think that this is where a lot of people don't think these things through and sort of realize, okay, could be why. Like one of the things that I think that would have been good was if Google just said, right, we're not going to put out a free version of Gemini or Bard, as it was first called, right? Back then when it was the Palm models, we're just going to, we're just going to have a paid version, right? So that then it would have been just a lot less people. Perhaps that would have been better. And anyway, well, things. But inference stuff, yeah, a lot of exciting stuff. Things are going to get faster, for sure. I think there's a number of tricks that Google can do with TPUs that are still yet to come.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna give you a choice of either. Do you want to talk about agentic frameworks, for example, like LangGraph and stuff like that next?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about whatever you guys want to talk about, or whatever anyone wants to ask questions.
Cool. So either that or computer API and controlling computers with like models, like stuff like Claude or Anthropic just came out with. So which one are you more interested in?
Both are interesting. Actually, I think they're kind of similar, because they're both sort of, the computer use thing is just a kind of agent loop idea anyway. So, and I think I just saw today LangGraph is trying to, or LangChain's trying to do something like that. I haven't sort of checked it, but I'm looking at Twitter or something. I saw that they were announcing doing something with where they can manage assets and stuff like that better. And I know from talking to Harrison that when the multimodal stuff first came out, that was the big thing that they were kind of concerned about, was okay, how are the models going to do images? How are the models going to do audio, so that they could plan their own, so that the LangChain guys could plan their own API for that. I think it worked out pretty good. They did a good job of being able to do the image stuff at least. The audio stuff we may see, let's see what happens. What do you want to go and shoot about the agentic frameworks? Let's try that.
Yeah. So LangChain, obviously, some people like it, some people hate it. What are your thoughts?
I kind of feel that LangChain cops a lot of shit just because they were the first ones. So I can remember, I think I used LangChain the second week it came out or something. I saw it and I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting, right? What is this?
This is when Harrison was still at his job, right?
This is when it was just like an open source thing on Harrison's GitHub and stuff like that. And the thing is, between then and I first met Harrison last year sometime. I've forgotten when last year, but between there was a stage where literally any time a new paper came out that was related to some kind of chain of thought pattern or something like that, they would implement it in LangChain, right? Which is pretty damn impressive, right? For them to like, be able to take Toolformer, take React, realize that, oh, these things are important, put it in. And of course, they're doing that on the fly. So, some of the decisions that they made, didn't, work out perhaps long term, and they had to go back and change things and stuff like that. So I kind of feel that like a lot of people bag them for that kind of, just because like, oh, they did all these things. That said, I'll be really honest, for everything that I don't have LangChain in production, right? I like it for prototyping ideas. I like it for doing small things and stuff like that. But I tend to basically just like, I think the best, agentic framework is code, right? Like just code. Because the thing at the moment is that every project is perhaps slightly different. And with something like LangChain, you're also bringing a lot of overhead with it. So, there were a lot of issues with that. I think LangGraph is kind of worked out better than, some of the things in LangChain, because they had more time to, think it through and stuff like that. I'm very reluctant to criticize them, just because like I've hung out with Lance, I've hung out with Harrison, stuff like that. I know how much effort they put into this. And I kind of feel like they are thinking these things through. And this is one of the reasons why I think people should learn LangChain, right? Is that if you're going to do agents or something, go and learn that stuff so that you then can understand like, okay, what's actually going on. And then often you'll realize, oh, for my project, I don't need all that stuff, right? I only need this bit and this bit and this bit. And often can be, you can just code up that part yourself, and it's going to be, better, or you can get it to work in a way that is just much quicker, much, easier to manage, rather than to have to worry about pinning a dependency of LangChain or LangGraph and stuff like that. Same with Llama Index. So I think Jerry's done an awesome job there too. Jerry and Simon. I should do videos about Llama Index. Like, it's funny because like I got kind of known as the LangChain guy early on, because I was probably one of the first people to make videos out of it. I think Greg and I were the early ones to make videos out of it. The funny thing is, like, I like Llama Index as well. I've just never got around to doing videos for that as much. So people sort of presume that, oh, you only like LangChain or something, where no, that's not the case, right? I think all of them have done interesting stuff. And I think, again, the challenge is all this stuff is changing, right? It's really changing so much. Even if you've just been working on this for the past 6 months or a year, you will have seen a lot of changes. Let alone if you go back like a couple of years, then things are, totally different. So, and even like before, that nowadays we kind of take it for granted doing inference with LLMs. Before that was really hard. Context windows were really small. I can remember, in deep learning, originally we were, I remember with like LSTMs, we had a context window of about 50 tokens. And
so 50 tokens?
Yeah.
That's like probably enough to do like tool calling.
Well, yeah, no, but then like at the end of the 50, it would kind of start forgetting the start of the 50. So then like attention came along, the original button now attention and stuff like that. That kind of got you out to 100, 150 maybe, or even a bit less than that. And then depending on what your data was and stuff like that. And then like when the transformer came out, suddenly things changed. And when BERT came out, like, BERT had like 512. And it's funny because like when we had 50, we were like, oh, if you could just get 10 times more than this, that'll be awesome. And then we got BERT, right? Okay, when we got BERT, it was like, oh, if I could just get 10 times more than this, right? And that's sort of like where we were with the early Llama models and early GPT models and stuff like that. But anyway, my point is that like trying to do any of this sort of stuff with a small token window was virtually impossible back then. So now that you can, do this, and these frameworks are doing it, it is kind of, it's still sort of new, and people are not sure how to structure it. I think like OpenAI did some really cool stuff with like function calling and some of the ideas around that. They really, I think they really could see that by adding special tokens in your training and stuff for things like functions, you could actually get these models to do a lot more than what people thought. All right. But so I think it's still early days with the agentic stuff. The other thing with the agentic stuff is it's kind of crazy that like, okay, when I was in SF this year, chatting to a VC, he was like, oh, what framework do you think is the best, right? And I kind of said, well, they all suck in different ways, right? And he was like, whoa, well, what do you mean, right? And then I kind of explained what I just did. And I said that like, oh, look, mostly I just roll my own stuff. And the guy just looked at me and was like, okay, I'll give you $3 million if you want to do a startup for that as like a new framework, right? I've got a lot of reusable stuff that I use, like especially related to tools. Like I think tools are the things that people don't really give enough attention, but the frameworks are not as important as the tools, right? The tools are way more important. And when I talk about the tools, what I'm talking about is not just the actual API call or that kind of thing, but how do you structure the data going in and how do you just structure the data coming out? All right. So the language models respond to data in different ways. All right. So if you're going to scrape something or you're going to get some searches or something like that, you want to make sure that you return it in a way that the LLM can make use of that. This is a big thing I believe in.
So that's like, I'm assuming that the most exciting thing that you think it is right now. So like tool, instead of like the framework or the agentic framework, it's like the actual tools that the agent is going to be using and how the data is outputs getting passed back and forth to like reason for like more steps.
But also not just that, but also like the fine tuning of models for tool use. So if you think about, you were asking before about like the Anthropic computer use, right? Okay, that they've obviously taken that Sonnet model and fine-tuned it to basically respond in this way, so that that now the tool is basically, I give you an image, you tell me where to click on that image, right? Or you tell me where to press and then type in some keys or something on that image. So if you think about it, if the model itself is not returning anything super complicated, but it's got to know how to inference that from the image that you give it. So if you give it, the Google search thing, and if you think about it, really, there's a finite amount of website design and key websites out there, right? Like how many search engines are there? They all pretty much look the same anyway. We know that there's going to be a search bar. We know that, so these LLMs can spot those patterns pretty quickly. So if you fine tune it on enough stuff so that it learns to do that, suddenly now you've got an awesome tool like Anthropic released, right? Where, okay, this thing can actually, it's not perfect all the time, obviously, but it can actually start to respond to this kind of thing. And you could imagine that now becomes a thing that everyone's got to train their models for. So the new OpenAI models or whatever, now everyone's going to be like training for that as well as for everything else. So I kind of feel like this is where we're starting to see the big companies get on the agentic bandwagon, where perhaps a year ago they were more focused just on trying to make their LLMs good and maybe a little bit about chain of thought. Now they're focused on, okay, well, how do we make this a good model for agents? What are the
does that mean
in and out?
Does that mean that companies like Multi-On is kind of like in a danger zone because now all the eyes are on the same use case now?
You got to think that that's a definite possibility. Yeah, like if you look at Adept, right? Adept ended up sort of packing up, right, and getting sold to someone or getting bought by someone. Like, I think the guys at Multi-On did really cool stuff, right? Like, and they were really early and that kind of thing. But yeah, like you've got to think that, okay, what they've got really, if you've got a good LLM that's made for that, and you've got like a tool that's perhaps designed by the LLM company, or that's just so standard that everyone ends up using the same kind of thing, and it's really interesting that like you had Anthropic. So most people don't realize that okay, you had Google put out a paper called Screen AI, right? You had Microsoft put out paper called Omniparser. Okay, both of these companies didn't put out models or data sets until Anthropic, dropped what they dropped. And then everyone then like, okay, Google still hasn't put out, the data set, or, I think they've made it so you can reproduce the data set. So I think they actually have made some of the things available, but certainly haven't released a model yet. Whereas Omniparser did release the model. And if you look at the models, they weren't that complicated. It's basically just a YOLO model for finding the bounding boxes of where things are. So you've got a regions of interest model, and then you had a Florence model, or originally it was a Blip2 model, but then changed to a Florence 2 model that's fine-tuned to basically say what this thing is. And so anyway, my key point there, though, is that all these companies are working on it, right? It just takes one of them to push the button and go, okay, we're going to put this out, right? And we're going to dare to do it. And then everyone else is like, okay, well, they've done it. We have to do it too, kind of thing. And so I think you'll see this happen with a lot of things, right? I think like, the good examples of that were function calling. OpenAI was the first one to do function calling. Nowadays, everyone's got it, right? All the major model providers and stuff like that. It's just kind of taken for granted now. That wasn't the case this time last year, even. So, I think those kind of things we will see. We will see the models get more adapted for the agents and tools, and I think that then is going to be, we've already seen OpenAI introduce Swarm, right? Which is a nice idea. Like some really nice ideas in there of just use code, keep it light. I like that kind of approach quite a bit. You could imagine that Google's working on agent stuff as well.
I was awake now. I'm not working in the level you're working, like, into the models and everything. I'm an applied developer, and I'm doing something kind of practical, which is dealing with all the faxes that a typical doctor gets in a month, which is right. I thought that was all gone. So I've got this huge prompt that rips through the faxes and essentially OCRs it, and then starts ripping through for information. Should I be like chunking those prompts? And, is this just causing myself grief to try to debug the prompt when I'm trying to get the data out?
So definitely, I would say the models are getting much better at doing the prompting than humans. So like one of the things that I do now almost all the time with something like Cursor, or even with Claude, or something like that, is I give it my prompt and I ask it, how would you make this prompt better? And more, it actually is getting better at like knowing to do that. That's again something that they're starting to train into the models for this. The thing I would, I wouldn't. I don't know how long your prompt is, right? So, but I wouldn't shy away from like a lot of things that I work on. We've got like a 2,000 token prompt, right, for it. So, I think one of the mistakes I see people make the most is that they go for really short prompts, right? Whereas actually these models, if you think about it, the whole thing, the way it works is conditional generation, right? So you put something in and it's predicting the next token kind of thing.
Right.
So if you understand that, the more that you put in to guide that, the more it's going to be confident in predicting out sort of what it is that you actually want. And so that includes things like giving it, in context learning examples, where you're basically putting examples in there of like, oh, if it says this and this and this, then you should reply this, or you should structure the output in this way, that kind of thing. One of the things that when you talk about in context learning examples, people think of like, oh, okay, I'll put one example, right? So DeepMind had a really good paper where they showed that like they still see things getting better when they've got like 512 examples, right? So
Okay.
now I'm not saying that you should put that many, right? But what I'm saying is like you shouldn't think that having 8 examples is a lot of examples, right?
Okay.
You know, don't be afraid to sort of like stuff that, especially as the costs come down, you know, more and more. I literally, like I mentioned earlier, I just recorded this video for OCR stuff, and one of the things that I found to be a trick there lately is that I will basically just call the same thing 3 times. And then usually if it's going to hallucinate, it'll just hallucinate on one of them and 2 of them will be okay. And then I give all 3 to another model to basically judge that and say, hey, okay, you know, here's three things. What's the consensus here? What makes most sense? Right. And that LLM judge might be something where it sort of says like, okay, here's the context. This is a doctor's office. You know, doctors talk about this and this and this. They get facts about this. They do that, this kind of thing. Out of these 3, put together the sort of composition of which makes the most sense. So this is kind of like a reflection step, but also as an LLM as a judge.
Okay, so thank you very much because you now wrecked my weekend. I'm really working on this. It's you know, I'm using Claude. I'm jumping back and forth between Claude and ChatGPT, and they're quite good, right? They're quite good, and certainly when the doctors and their staff are looking at it, it's like, yeah, it's pretty close. And I'm looking at, I don't even understand half the stuff,
right?
And it's coming up with the medical terminology and handwritten notes. It does a fantastic job of.
Yeah.
Doctors, this is doctors we're talking about. You know? Like, I don't know, what's that, like 2 sigma or something? Like, you know, so these, yeah, it's interesting. Well, thank you very much. That was good.
No, definitely like try it out, and don't be afraid to also try the other models like Gemini and stuff like that. The Flash model has gotten so cheap, right? That like, you know, that it's worth it. I know you guys in Canada didn't get Gemini for a long time.
Yeah,
people used to badger me about that all the time.
I was at
it's everywhere but Canada.
I was at the TED AI hackathon, and the Google guy came up, and I said, "Does it work in Canada?" And he's like, "Of course it works in Canada." I said, "You better check." And he did. He's like, "Well, I'm very sorry, but I don't know what we did."
No,
we're usually pretty laid back.
It was really funny because yeah, like there were certain countries, like UK was another one that like just didn't, it took a long time for them to get access to certain stuff, but Canada always. And every time I'd ask the Googlers, because the hilarious thing is on YouTube, I would make a video about Gemini and people would bitch at me about it, right? Like I don't control it, but then I would ask my friends on the Gemini team, it's like, oh, what's the deal here? And they're like, oh, it's a legal issue or something, right? It's like, you know, some issue.
There was a government thing where they wanted Google and Facebook to pay for links.
Okay.
And I think they got embroiled. They just said, no, screw you. You get nothing. So I'm running on a VPN. I don't care.
Yeah, but well, that's the thing, right? Is that the Googlers can't say run out of a VPN for legal reasons or something, but I can, because I'm not a Googler, and I'm gonna, yes, I would say run out of VPN. That's exactly right.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks.
Cool. So I just checked. I just realized that in Singapore it's 12:30 a.m. right now.
That's okay. All right.
Sam, thank you so much for being on here today.
No problem. It was awesome. It was a good chat. Hopefully it was useful to people.
Absolutely. How can people find you online?
But obviously the YouTube is the best place, you know, to sort of see me. You can add me on LinkedIn, you know, happy to, if you want to add me on LinkedIn or something like that. I generally try to publish videos a couple of times a week on YouTube. I get really busy, and that's, you know, a challenging thing. I also have a Patreon where I'm doing sort of more advanced stuff and stuff like that there, more for if people are actually working on stuff and like, you know, working in the industry and stuff like that. So people can check that out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sam. I hope this is not way past your bedtime, but
no, it was good fun. Like I said, I got to fly to back to Europe tomorrow, so this is getting me back into the right time zone.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and everybody have a good weekend.
Yeah, same. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.